Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book. Hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Book. I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Karen, and I hear from a little birdie that you might have a new project cooking.
I absolutely do. And, I was working on it today and I was thinking about you, Tess Thompson, because I only have about 20,000 words, which is a good basis for me. And then I'm going to be proceeding. The first 20 to 30,000 words go really slow for me. I just feel like I'm, the tortoise and other people are the hare, which would be you, my little fast rabbit friend. But I realized the difference because you had said, and I think it was in a previous podcast, that your first draft is very rough, but you just try to get the story down as quickly as possible because you get that momentum going. And I was like, okay, so that's just a different process. You're still way more prolific than I am. But in my case, it's also true that going more slowly is indicative of how I do it, how I work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is what I thought was so great about Jamie Davenport's interview it'll be last week. But I love that she said that, that you really have to figure out what your process is and then honor it and not go, oh, so-and-so writes 10,000 words a day. Should I be doing that? It's like instead, you've got 20,000 solid words. And, for me, I think we've talked about this before too. Like I'm still kind of exploring in those first 20 to 30,000 words. And then I kind of figure out what the story is. And so, all that has to be rewritten usually. So I don't know that it makes me any faster really than your way. It's just my way.
Well, I would say based on your output and the fact that you had so many books out, now we have to tell our listeners that I'm following you on Amazon. So every time you have a new book coming out, I get the email letting me know, Tess Thompson has a new book out. And with the last one, I think it may have been number 8, I had emailed you. I forwarded that and said, okay, we get it. You're prolific. Stop showing off.
Oh my God, that was so funny. That was an LOL moment for me. Speaking of Amazon and emails that I get from them, I got one this morning telling me about a Karen McQuestion book that I had never heard of, nor a cover I had ever seen. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, is it the one that's coming out in April?
No.
Yes.
I don't think so. What's the title of the one in April?
The one in April is called 214 Palmer Street.
No. Mm-mm. This was a cover with a girl on it. And I thought, is this one of your middle grade books?
Is it? Boy, I wonder if there's another Karen McQuestion. Oh, I know it. Is it called Life on Hold?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, that is one of my young adult novels.
Oh, okay.
And it was one of my very first ones. And it's, I don't know if you are this way, but there are a couple things in there that I would change if I could go back and had the opportunity to revise it. I still think it's a good story, and I'm glad they're still promoting it, but there's little parts of that I cringe at now. For instance, the main character has an eclectic grouping of friends. They're all kind of the, maybe the little bit of the underdog thing going on. But one of them, I'm not going to say what it is, but it's a little, nowadays it would be considered not PC. It's a little stereotypical that this person is the way they are. And I'm like, I actually knew someone like this, and it was sort of based on that. But in retrospect, I can see where that was not probably the way I depict it today.
That's interesting. Yeah, well, we're always evolving and learning. And I think particularly like our sort of generation is in the middle between, our kids that are so much smarter than us and, so much more open to new ideas. And then, our parents' generation. So I think it can be tricky here in the middle, and we're doing the best we can.
Well, I really am. And I never want to offend anyone or diminish them in any way. So I hope that nobody ever takes it that way. I had a woman email me once saying that an experience that one of my characters had was not the same as she had when she went through the same kind of crisis. And had I ever gone through it, I really felt badly because I felt like this woman went through something awful. I can't remember if it was a divorce or a death. And she felt that I hadn't depicted it accurately. So I emailed her and I was apologetic and said, I actually had a good friend who went through it and she had shared with me her situation. And I guess it's possible that different people have different reactions. I walked around the house all day feeling like I had just affected this woman in a negative way, which is never my intent. And she, God bless her, she emailed back and said, "I'm so glad you answered and explained. I feel so much better about this. I think I was being overly sensitive." So you never know. And, for every email like that, which are very few, I've gotten dozens and dozens of people who've said that they've enjoyed the stories. It gave them a lift or they felt like I connected with a situation. So it's not always like that, but that's the one that stood out in my mind just because it really affected me.
Yeah. Well, that was great that you wrote back. I don't know. Sometimes when I get emails like that are a little critical, I hesitate to write back because my feelings are hurt. I mean, and actually that's a good segue into our interview today because Suzanne Redfearn, who is our guest, talks about when you're writing a review for a book that it's a person on the other end who wrote it and to just keep that in mind.
Yeah, she said a lot of wise things, but that really hit home with me.
For sure. All right. Well, enough of us. We will let our listeners enjoy Suzanne Redfearn.
Today, we're so excited to have Suzanne Redfearn with us. She's the best-selling author of 4 novels, Hadley and Grace, In an Instant, No Ordinary Life, and Hush Little Baby. Her newest novel, Moment in Time, will be published March 8th, which I guess by the time this airs, it will be behind us. Born and raised on the East Coast, Suzanne moved to California when she was 15. She currently lives in Laguna Beach with her husband, where they own 2 restaurants, Lumberyard and Slice Pizza and Beer. In addition to being an author, Suzanne is an architect specializing in residential and commercial design. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, we always start off the podcast by asking authors about their path to publication. Did you always want to be a novelist?
Oh gosh, no. To me, being an author was a little like saying I wanted to be an astronaut. It just seemed like one of those careers that just wasn't for like normal, everyday people. My mother was a teacher. My dad was an engineer. And I think I always just assumed that was kind of what you did when you grew up. So yeah, it was very much lucky for me. My grandfather, it turns out, who was a milkman, never got a high school diploma, loved to write poetry. And his poems were always very folkish. And they used to be like, they would tell stories within the poems. And I have a whole little trove of them. And I really think that storytelling is a little bit of a gift. And so, when I sat down and said, I'm going to write a novel kind of as a bucket list endeavor, I discovered I had this incredible kind of ability to tell stories. And I fell in love with it.
So at some point, did you secretly think that someday you'd be an author? I mean, even though it's far-fetched, was it ever in the back of your mind?
Yeah. So I sat down, I had actually had a glass of wine. I always blame my career on having a glass of wine with this one girlfriend. We were sitting and we were talking about this one book, and I'm a lightweight when it comes to drinking. So one glass of wine, and I was like, I'm going to write a novel. And I sat down and really had no idea of getting published. And I was so embarrassed by the idea that I was actually writing a novel. I didn't tell my husband. And so I don't know what he thought I was doing into the wee hours of the morning as I was pecking away at the keys. But yeah, after 7 months, I had my first novel, and it was just terrible. I mean, it was just written just horribly. I didn't know where to put a comma. I didn't know. I definitely didn't know what to do with a semicolon. Those things still scare me. But what I discovered is that I knew how to tell a story, and so I decided to see if I could learn, if I could pick up the craft of it. And, it's not an easy journey. And I tell, people that are setting out to write, if you want to be a writer, you have to write. Hush Little Baby, which is my first published novel, was my 5th manuscript. And so, I just had a lot of stories to tell, and I just kept telling them, and I kept getting better at the craft. And yeah, luckily I had a fallback career. It wasn't do or die whether I got published or not, but I definitely fell in love with the art of being a writer.
So if someone is not familiar with your books, which should they start with?
I really hope that they would start with In an Instant. As you guys both know, you're both writers. So every once in a while, the writing gods will shine down on you and bestow you a gift of a story. And it doesn't always happen. In an Instant was one of those moments. I knew it from the moment the story was given to me that this was, truly a special story. And I wrote it, and it's resonated with a lot of people. It's been published into 21 different languages, which is really cool to see it around the world. And if there was one story I would want you to read, that would be the one, because I think it's the one that makes you think the most about yourself and your own humanity. And then if you really like that story, the nice thing is Moment in Time is not necessarily a sequel of that, but it takes two of the characters from that story and it revisits them 8 years down the line. So you could read In an Instant, then read Moment in Time and enjoy the continuation of at least a few of the characters from that book.
In some previous interviews, you've said that some of your fiction is based on things, or inspired by maybe, that you've seen or experienced. Would you mind expanding on that?
Yeah, I always tell everybody, be careful what you say or do around me, because I'll tell you if it's quirky, funny, or at all worthwhile, I will steal it from you and I will give you absolutely no credit for it. Yeah, most of my stories come from something. In an Instant, again, that one was really, it's probably the only one that's actually really personal to me. It was based on something that happened to me, a pretty traumatic event when I was 8 years old. And at the time when I was 8, I didn't realize how traumatic the event was, because you're 8, so your perspective is fairly narrow. But as an adult looking back on it, I was suddenly just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. I can't believe that's the way people acted. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a story. So that was definitely on a personal experience. And then, my very first published book, Hush Little Baby, was based on a couple I knew. They were getting a divorce, and it was a he said, she said. And I had this just notion of, oh my gosh, if you really wanted to sabotage your husband or your spouse, you could really do that. You know all their secrets. And if the stakes are high enough, which is child custody, how would you go about that? And so that was the basis of that novel. And, not all of them are based on that. Hadley and Grace, which is a really fun road trip novel, is based on my love of Thelma and Louise. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun to see if I could rewrite Thelma and Louise? Which it turns out, by the way, you cannot, because Thelma and Louise was written in a time when women were much more oppressed than they are now. And I started writing, I'm like, oh, you can't really write that because women are so much more empowered, which is extremely cool. But it did end up being a road trip about two very unlikely friends and very unlikely criminals, kind of on the run.
I'm very curious about this because this has been a discussion in some of my writing groups recently about how you choose which tense and, first person or third person and all that. So tell us why you have chosen to tell your stories in the present tense.
I think writers need to find their authentic voice. For me, I didn't know anything about writing. I mean, literally, like I said, one glass of wine, woo, I'm going to write a book. I sat down and what came out was present tense. And I didn't even know that was unusual. But my books are very contemporary. If you've read any of my books, they're in the now, they're in the moment. You're actually traveling through the story with the characters. And I think that's why it comes out that way. I did try and write past tense in my book, and it was just so awkward for me. And I think it's just because I don't know how other writers do it, because everybody's got their own way. But when I'm actually writing, I'm actually kind of experiencing what my characters are going through as they're going through it. So it feels very present tense to me. And I think that's why it came out. And I remember reading Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. And it was the first book I read that was present tense. And I was reading it and I'm going, what is it about this? It seems so familiar. And I was like, oh my gosh, she writes like I do. She's writing present tense. And it was just so odd to hear somebody else writing like that, and now I notice it more, but that was the first one that I really resonated with me, that it was very different.
So what does a writing day look like for you? And do you outline your books? I'm
pretty diligent about my writing. I definitely treat it as a job. I feel like it's a luxury for me to be able to do this and to set my architecture aside. My family's made sacrifices for me to do this. So I treat it very much like I wake up. And normally I used to, pre-pandemic, I would go to Starbucks and I would sit and I would write. And I know that sounds really odd, but truthfully, I have to get out of the house because otherwise there's too many distractions. But also the ambient, and it's funny because I remember Hemingway writing something about this, and it's really true. The ambient noise around you and the characters around you kind of contribute to your story. I don't know how many people in Starbucks don't realize they're in my books, but they're totally in my books. I'm like, oh, that person's perfect for this. I used to write in Starbucks. Pandemic happened. So now what I do is I drive to a Starbucks and I sit in my car and I write outside of Starbucks, so I can still use their Wi-Fi, but it does give me that kind of isolated space where I don't get distracted by things at home. And I write every day. I write 7 days a week, unless there's, some event or something, but typically I write 7 days a week.
I find that fascinating. And you park in their parking lot. And has anyone ever asked, like, do you need assistance? Or
like, are you okay, lady?
Are you okay? I live in a very small town. So I actually started for a while, like parking at a different Starbucks that was outside of town because so many people would be like, hey, Suzanne, how are you doing? I'm like, oh no. Why are you in your car? Did your husband kick you out? And I'm like, no.
That's a whole new take on, I don't know if you guys have ever read about Alice Munro, but she, I think she called them the Jennifers, and it was like her neighbors and the ladies, in her, around her that would stop by for coffee or to say hello, and it would drive her crazy because she would be writing, and she's like, nobody understood that was like sacred time when the kids weren't here and et cetera. Exactly. So it's sort of the same type of thing.
Well, also I get this very like resting bitch face when I'm writing. Oh, I don't know if I can say that anymore. I get this very like intense, like really dark face when I'm writing because you're like in it, and so people think that there's something really traumatic happening to you, and that's why they do knock on your window.
That is absolutely hilarious.
It really is. I can just see you in there like typing away,
And sometimes I'm crying. I'm doing that thing where the tears are streaming down my face because I just killed off my favorite character. No, you're writing.
I love it.
So do you outline your books?
No, I'm a full-on pantser, which, I don't know if people know plotsters and pantsers. So plotsters outline, they're very, they have everything kind of they know where they're going, and pantser flies by the seat of their pants. So because I write very thematically, which I kind of mentioned, which is like I have a big concept, what I tend to do is don't go down a lot of rabbit holes. When I first start with a concept, I'll just, whatever comes to mind on that idea, the big idea, I'll kind of go down those rabbit holes and I'll create pages and pages, probably, 30, 40 pages of just idea notes. And it's not really an outline, but it's kind of this mishmash. And as I'm doing that, the idea is kind of starting to coalesce in my head. I'm starting to get characters in my head. And then I sit down and write, and it's very stream of consciousness. But at that point, for some reason, this magic takes place. You sort of know the story by that time. So it's not really an outline, but yet in my head, somehow I kind of know what's going on.
At what point do you share a work in progress? Who are your first readers?
Yeah, I used to have, a band of, 5 or 6 trusted people. And now, as you guys probably know, you have so many other people that are inputting between your agent and your editor and your copy editor that I find that I don't want actually too many outside voices. So my daughter, who, if any of you have daughters, is very honest and brutally so. And so she's my first go-to reader. She's also very smart, and she's very good at editing. And then my agent is fantastic. He reads everything I write, and he gives very good feedback. So those are my first two. After it's pretty clean, I'll give it to them, do a major overhaul after I get their feedback. Then I send it on to my editor.
So as you think of story ideas, do you keep track of them? Do you have a list somewhere?
Yeah, I only have one. I have one that's been niggling at me seriously for 15 years, and it's probably never going to get written. It's just a word. It's literally one word, and I'm like, there's something there. There's got to be something there, but yet it's never gotten anywhere past the word. So I don't think there's actually anything there. But beyond that, usually I got this panic thing that happens sort of towards the end of a story when I'm just about finished, that I'll never have another good idea again. I've written the last good thing I'm ever going to write. And oh my God, I'm done as a writer. I'm dried up and, whatever. And so as I'm finishing up whatever project I'm working on, and I'm spiraling down this very big, deep, dark hole, usually ideas will start spinning wildly in my head. And the ones that are terrible fizzle out, and usually one or two will start to kind of glow. And if they stay, then I kind of know there might be something there. And it doesn't always work out, but typically one of those will turn out to be something. Hopefully. And hopefully I do keep having that, because I still do have the panic of it'll never happen again.
I think a lot of writers have that. Or you think this is the best thing I've ever written, and this is it. Like I'll write something else, but it won't be this good.
Exactly.
And sometimes readers say that too. This is her best novel to date. And you're like, oh, well, now I can only go downhill from there.
so true.
I am wondering about that one word that keeps nagging at you. Are you willing to share it, or will
sure,
that?
Sure. Okay, so I have this word, sirens, and I'm like, oh, it's got so many meanings to it. Oh my gosh, what could you do with that word? Because sirens, it's Homer's Odyssey, and it's the sirens of death, and it's the sirens of the ambulance chasing down the street, and I'm like, sirens of in terms of the women that are calling to you, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much to that word. But hey, if somebody can do something with it, good luck to you. I've had it for 15 years.
I have a feeling it's going to come to you. That's a good one. Yeah.
Maybe. But you asked me if I wrote anything down. That one word is staring at me.
In red, probably.
It is. Right? Red and blaring, just like it sounds.
Do you ever have any doubts about a book, either while you're writing it or after it's published?
Oh, constantly. Yeah, from the moment I set pen to paper, I always compare writing a little bit to like having a child. You start off, you find out you're pregnant, and you're like, woo, and for me, it's like, I have an idea, woo, and then you get into that first trimester and you feel pretty much nauseous the entire time, and then you get into the trudgery part of, okay, I just got to get through this another day, eat my vitamins, make sure I'm eating healthy and, doing the work and everything. And then, out comes the baby and it's like, oh my God, it's ugly. It's covered in slime. And then they clean it up and you're like, oh, okay, that's not so bad.
It looks better with a comma in there.
It looks better when they clean it up, but yeah, pretty much the entire way through, I'm full of self-doubt and self-loathing and all that other wonderful stuff that authors go through.
So now you mentioned your daughter. Do other members of your family read your books?
I have an incredible tribe. My husband reads everything, even the things that don't get published, and he's done it since before I got published. So, kudos to him. He is a voracious reader, but it's just really, it shows his incredible support. And then my son, who, like many young adults, doesn't read, has actually read everything I've written. And it's really cute because he actually says he doesn't like to read. And yet he's the one, once he reads my books, that cannot wait to sit down and talk about them with me and discuss the characters. And he gets really angry at me. Why'd you do that? Why'd you kill that? I'm like, I didn't do it. I said, the character killed the person. He's like, but you. I'm like, no. Frank killed the person. It wasn't your mother. Your mother did not take a knife and stab the guy and bludgeon him to death. It's very, very cute because he really doesn't read. And I'm hoping that at some point he's going to enjoy my books enough that maybe he'll decide to read other people as well.
And how old is he, if you don't mind me asking?
He's 27. Yeah.
Oh.
But he's been reading my books now since he's been, 15? So, yeah.
Wow. That's so cute.
Your books might be the gateway drug that leads him to other books.
I sure am praying and hoping.
Yeah, I think young people are so busy, building their life. They don't have time to read, but later on they pick it up. What's the best part about being an author?
Definitely for me is the connection with the readers. It doesn't happen with every novel because, some novels resonate more than others. But the very first novel I wrote, Hush Little Baby, was about domestic violence. And I got dozens of letters from people in that situation who said how much my book spoke to them. C.S. Lewis said, we read to know we are not alone. And, I never realized that really is the truth until I got these letters from people saying, look how much you told my story or how much I related to this woman's journey. And then when I wrote In an Instant is a lot about mourning and death and grief, how you perceive grief, and then also how you want to be remembered. It's told from the omniscient perspective of somebody who dies in an accident. And because it's told from this perspective, you get to see kind of how she feels about her own death. And I have gotten, I mean, countless, I can't even tell you how many letters I've gotten just saying how much this book has helped them through a mourning process, which I did not expect when I wrote it. It wasn't what the intention of the book was. But again, that same thing where this character spoke to them. I've had people say, can I read this at my son's funeral? Can I, and you get letters like that and it just sends chills down your spine. And you think, wow. If you can write something that actually resonates with a reader and then they write to you and they tell you that, it doesn't get better than that. Such
a great honor. So is there a writing book that you'd recommend for those just starting out?
Yeah, if you're like me, I always say you can't really teach storytelling. You can learn the craft, but storytelling is pretty hard to teach. But if you have that gift of being able to weave a story, and now you just need to learn how to write. I really would suggest going out and buying every book that there is and just reading through them. I mean, if you really want to do this, you really have to learn. And that's how I did it. But there are two in particular that were very practical and really just, I still go back to them just to make sure I'm kind of hitting, crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And that's Donald Maass. I think he's an agent. And he wrote the book, Writing a Breakout Novel. And it's very practical. It's kind of like a workbook style. And so for the very beginning author who's never written anything, for me, that was kind of like, oh, okay, so that's how you do that. And that's how you do this. And so that was really practical. And then through a writing convention, I'd heard about Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, which he's a screenwriter, but he's very formulaic in how he does story arc and character arc. And once you read his book, you kind of get it. It's kind of like, oh, okay, so that's where I have to start at point A, hit this point B, fall down to point C, go back up to point D, and go back to point E, And so it just really helps you to kind of get that rhythm of what storytelling is.
Yeah, those are good ones. That's funny that you say that about Donald Maass, because that was one of my early ones as well. And I actually sent him my first manuscript, and he wrote me back a very nice rejection letter. But because I had said, I read your book, and I'm hoping that it's all in this book that I'm sending you. And I guess apparently it wasn't. But I thought it was kind that he wrote me back.
Yes.
So what other advice would you give to aspiring writers?
Anytime you want something, you have to work for it. And if you want to be a writer, you need to write. I mean, then you need to write some more, and then you need to write some more. I'll talk to a lot of aspiring authors, and they'll say, oh yeah, I've got this book, and I've been working on this for 10 years, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, well, what else are you working on? And they're like, no, I'm going to sell this one. And the truth is, you don't know what's going to resonate or what's going to strike at any given time. If you want to be a writer, you write. Like I said, Hush Little Baby was my 5th manuscript, just a real short aside, In an Instant, which has gone on to sell, like I said, in 21 countries and has gone to be a huge bestseller. It was rejected. It was rejected by my current publisher at the time. They said it straddled genres. And then my agent sent it out to a dozen other editors. It was rejected by all of them. So the gatekeepers don't necessarily know what they're doing or talking about, or times change or whatever. And so the more you have in your cachet to offer that they can then try and sell something else or sell something else, the more chance you have of getting published. So just, along that path, I had set In an Instant aside because it had gotten rejected by so many people. And then I wrote another book, which is a very large novel. It's a big concept novel. And that's how I got back into the writing world, was I thought, oh, you know what, I'll send this out to some agents. And I got a fantastic agent through this other book. And the political climate changed, and I couldn't publish that book. It just turned out to not be viable at the time. And she actually said to me, send me something else. And thank goodness I had In an Instant, which was 7 years old, sitting in my computer. And I sent it to her, and now it's gone on to do what it's doing. And I'm talking to you on a podcast. So,
wow.
Like I said, if you're going to be a writer, write. And then when you put the end, say the end, and then take out a fresh sheet of paper and say once upon a time, and, start again.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I've also known aspiring writers who kept rewriting and revising the same manuscript for years, as opposed to just setting it aside and starting something new. We had a previous guest that called it practice. It's all practice. Yeah. Every time you tell a new story, there's more learning and growth as a writer. So yeah, I think that's really an excellent point.
I always have this saying, there are no wasted words.
That's very good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what do you wish people knew about the life of an author? Have you encountered any misconceptions?
I don't know about misconception. I think people think being an author is a whole lot more glamorous than it is. I mean, most days I'm sitting in my car typing on my computer, looking pretty grouchy. So I don't know about their perception of what it is that I actually do every day. But the one thing that I probably want most people to understand is that I don't look at my reviews anymore. I don't find it helpful, and I just don't do it. But I know a lot of new authors and a lot of debut authors that, their whole life has been staked on this. They've been working, years, like you said, on the same novel, and they finally make it through the gauntlet, and they're finally getting their baby out in the world. And there's some really harsh critics out there. So I would like readers to understand that when you're writing a review, there's someone on the other side of that, and to maybe couch your criticism, understanding that this could be your sister, your mother, your aunt, and just kind of keep that in mind, that I've seen a lot of fragile egos get really wounded by some pretty harsh criticism, and just maybe understand that there is somebody on the other side of that that's receiving it.
Do you have an ideal reader in mind when you write?
I think I write for myself, like in the sense that I don't like backstory when I'm reading. I don't like exposition when I'm reading. So every time I start writing, I'm like, ew, I don't like that. So I think I just write for myself. I like books that have really fast moving plots. I like books that make me think. So yeah, that sounds really egotistical, but I do. I think I write for myself.
A lot of people have answered that question the same way. So you're not alone. Yeah.
Have you ever started a novel manuscript and then made the deliberate decision not to finish it?
Not really, because like I said, how I write is basically going down these rabbit holes of kind of discovery. And by the time I've gone down enough of these meandering paths, I kind of know whether the story has legs to it or not. And if it doesn't, then I don't even start. And then I have started novels that I know are not very good. Like I've started them and I go, this probably isn't a very good novel, but I have this really dogged determination that I'm like, I'm going to finish it. Cause like you said, there's no wasted words. It's practice. I'm going to see if I can work it out. And then, something comes out of it. But I must have 6, 7 novels that are sitting in my computer that have never seen the light of day. Cause I know they're not good enough. I know the story isn't what I want it to be. And maybe someday I'll revisit them and maybe there'll be something there. But it's like stepping up to the plate in baseball, you're not always going to get a hit, and you're definitely not always going to get a grand slam. You got to let yourself off the hook on that one. Otherwise you would never put another word on a page,
How consumed are you with the story when you're in the middle of writing something?
Oh, it used to be terrible. My kids would come home from school and they'd say, oh my God, I got chased from the bus stop by a bully. He was throwing rocks at me. Like, oh, that's nice, honey. Because, I'm so in my other world. It's gotten better now. Usually when I set my writing aside, I'm pretty good about going back to my life. But definitely my mind in the beginning of a story will spin crazily when I'm sleeping. And which is good, because that's a lot of times your subconscious is working things out, and that's when your best ideas come. But without a doubt, I'm definitely a pretty restless person in those first beginning few months of trying to kind of figure it out.
Who has been your biggest supporter? You mentioned your husband.
Yeah.
As you built your craft and career, would you say it's him?
Definitely him. So after I was, typing away, and I'm sure he thought I had some illicit lover on the other side. I don't know what he thought I was doing. I decided I finally had to fess up. So I come out one morning and I'm like, honey, I'm like, we need to talk, which are, by the way, most dreaded words in a relationship, right? Honey, we need to talk. And he's sitting on the couch. He's reading his newspaper. He's drinking his coffee. And so very, very somberly, he sets down his coffee. He sets down his newspaper, gives me his full attention. And I think I'm writing a novel. And he goes, oh, okay. He picks up his newspaper and he picks up his coffee, and that was the end of it. So right then and there, I knew I'd married the perfect man, because really, honestly,
completely unflappable.
That's hilarious.
Ever since. I mean, I'd never written anything beyond my dissertation for architecture, and here I'm writing a novel, so.
That's amazing. What is your why when it comes to your fiction? What are you hoping readers will take from your work?
Yeah, it's that same thing of feeling like, gosh, if you can write something that when you read it, you go, that could be me, or what would I do if that were me? And gosh, I don't really know the answer to that, but to really create that depth of thought that I think only reading can do. Truthfully, I don't know any other art form where you can walk inside another person's mind and actually know their thoughts, where you're not just looking at somebody, but you're actually inside their being and really experiences somebody else's human experience. So if you're asking me the why, that's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it to hopefully find that connection, and that somehow a reader the story resonates with them in a way that nothing else can kind of do.
Now, your book, Moment in Time, which is coming out soon and will already be out by the time we speak, I'm sure that the promotion for that has been consuming, but is there another writing project you're working on in the meantime?
Yeah. So, I had this good fortune of reading, I was reading a news article, and there was this crazy story where on both sides, it was like, no one's in the wrong. There's this side of the story and there's this side of the story. And truthfully, both of them are in the right. And it was very tragic and it was very poignant. And so I thought, gosh, there's a seedling there. And at the same time, I had been contemplating, because I'd run across a couple of people that seemed like they just were very wealthy and very unhappy. And I was like, I had just had this kind of niggling of, does money create happiness or contentment? And at what level does it and what level doesn't? And so this kind of combination of this story that was kind of, in the news, and then this other idea of money and whether it creates contentment or not. And so that's what I'm mulling over. The working title is True Fortune, and it's still a mess, but I like the idea of it. And I like where it's going in terms of just contemplating, what's really meaningful in our lives.
That sounds really interesting. All right. Well, now we are in the fun extra question portion of our episode. And I always feel like we need some music or something to announce it, but we don't have that. So I'm just going to ask you the first question.
Okay.
What is one food that will never get past your lips?
Well, I'm vegetarian, so most meat doesn't make it past my lips. But the one food that definitely would never, I just can't imagine any scenario where I'd put it in my mouth is, if you're the Vietnamese food balut, where it's the half-formed ducks they've been fertilized and they're half-formed and then you're supposed to eat them. They had it on Survivor, and I was like, I would just lose the challenge. I mean, I'd be sent home immediately.
Yeah. $1 million is not worth it.
There's just no way I could put that in my mouth. So yeah, balut. I would not eat balut.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Sandra Bullock. Yeah, poor thing. She'd probably refuse, but if I could choose, I just think she just has such a sparkle and she's quirky, and yes, definitely.
Yeah, Karen and I love her too.
We do. And I kind of see a resemblance. So yeah, definitely that's a good choice.
Yeah, I agree. What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
I would be a time traveler, because when you think about it, if you had the ability to go back in time, and then you could alter history. Like, say, you could go back in time and you could go back to like when Hitler was only like a child, and then you could alter his course. You would literally alter the entire future of the universe, right?
There's actually a novel about that, which I can't think of the name of, but it's basically like every chapter is a new version of this woman trying to alter Hitler. It's fascinating. Yeah, and of course I can't think of the name of it. It was really big like 10 years ago. I'll try to find it.
Consciousness. Yeah. But you could alter anything. I mean, think about it. You could just literally stop things from happening. You could create, electric powered cars before you created gas powered cars, or like plant the seed for it. And so then you never have fuel powered cars.
Absolutely. Although I do wonder if I was sent back and they'd say, so how do you do that? I'd be like, I don't know. Because I don't know how the internet works, or I mean,
that's true. Yeah,
you have to do your research ahead of time. And then
I see. Okay,
and be like, okay, so this is the scientist, and he lives in this area. I'm going to go to him and tell him to do this XYZ.
Exactly.
What's your biggest guilty pleasure?
I don't watch a lot of television, but I definitely binge on reality television with my kids. We watch Survivor, and we watch Australian Survivor, and we watch, The Amazing Race. So, that's definitely, I kind of love the anthropology of it, just to kind of see how people interact with each other under very different circumstances. Yeah.
That's research for novel writing.
There you go. We'll call it research.
Absolutely. What's the worst job you've ever had?
I didn't like corporate life at all. I felt like my every day sitting in a cubicle, my soul was slowly being sucked from my body. So yeah, I don't know if it was the worst job I ever had, but it was definitely the one I needed to change course. And definitely, again, my husband, this poor guy, I go to him, I'm like, I want to be an architect. He's like, okay. So, he supported me through architecture school. This guy's amazing.
Wow.
A lot of faith in you.
But yeah.
If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
I have always wanted to be able to be musical, and I'm not, but I have a guitar, and every few months I pick it up and go, God, I'm really not musical. So yes, if I could become an expert in something, it would be guitar, and not for any reason other than like, I'd love to be able to go to the beach and like hang out and sing songs and, jam with some other people. But yeah, I missed that gene somewhere along the way.
What's your favorite smell?
Okay, that one's easy. It's Christmas. I mean, anything Christmas. I don't really like the commercialism of Christmas, but you set me into a store with the cider and the cinnamon and the pine, and there's just something about it. It's just a happy smell.
What's the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
So my daughter, she's very precocious. She was very precocious when she was little, and she really wanted to go on this game show. I don't know if you guys remember, it was called Brain Surge. And so it was this like test for little kids. And so she tries to apply for it, and they say, oh no, we only have an opening for family brain surge. So you have to go on with a family member. And I hate being in the spotlight. But I'm trying to be a good mom. So I went on Brain Surge, and we lost. And I had to go down the brain drain, which was this giant foam tube on national television. So yeah, I remember sitting at the top and being really like, oh my God, what am I doing here? It was an out-of-body experience.
Imagine. That's a good one. That is definitely a good one. What's one thing you're really bad at?
I actually asked my husband, I'm like, what am I really, really bad at? He goes, you are terrible when it comes to cold. And I am. I'm a complete wimp. So if you want me to go on this, and I love to ski, which is kind of funny, but I have to be really bundled up. But yeah, I don't do well in the cold, and I complain a lot and I whine a lot. And yeah, no, you don't want to be with me in a snowstorm.
If you could live your life over again, would you want to?
Absolutely not. I mean, every challenge, every obstacle, everything, every hiccup along the way has led me to where I am. And I like where I'm at. I like my life. I'm grateful for it every day, especially based on the last couple of years. I wake up every day just kind of a little grateful and just kind of say, you know what? It's good. It's all good. So no, I absolutely would not.
All right. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for us. This was so much fun to get to know you. Thank you for being on here. We know you're busy with your launch and all that.
Thank you for having me. It was so nice to finally meet you guys.
Thank you for carving out the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and post a question in the comments section. This has been Behind the Book.